If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniak. Hello everyone. Sorry if my voice is different here, I'm quite unwell at the minute. But I was going to ask, what channels do you like to see me work with? And what type of videos do you enjoy most and want to see me make more of? Now with that out of the way, hope you're all having a great day, and let's get to the video. So my friends and I went camping this week with my friend's dad, who took time off work so we could go up early. And we're trying to get some fun in before school starts in a couple of weeks. We went up to the campsite and set up camp just before jumping into our swimming gear, heading to the lake shore. We're playing around, tossing a frisbee around the water, when Jake went to drive for a frisbee that flew too far. He went underwater and we all stood by waiting for him. After a long time, we get into a weird state of confusion in unison, walking towards where he's drove. A couple of us called his name in uncertainty. Moose panics first, going into hyper lifeguard mode. He's flying through the water. We all kept looking towards him. The surface hasn't even calmed before Moose emerged, pulled a flailing jacket out of the depths. We all sighed, but Jack wasn't having it. He's kicking and screaming, throwing punches. One caught Moose in the eye, dropping Jake. They both go under for a second, popping back up. Jake was whirling around, twisting back and forth, looking for something. "Where is it?" he screamed, hands hovering just over the water. Moose re-emerged, a hand over his eye. To his credit, he didn't get mad, but he did keep his distance while the rest of us were approaching. "Jake, you right, mate?" Parker said. "Where is it?" "Oh, the frisbee's in the water, dude. It's fine. Let's get you back, okay?" "No, not the frisbee. The thing that grabbed me." "That would be me, moron," Moose called, massaging his face. I heard it calling my name." "No, that was us, Jake. We thought you were drowning," McKay explained. Jake wasn't having any of it though, still searching the water. He scrambled suddenly, but came back up immediately, stretching his arms out. Moosey saw it first. We all craned our necks, trying to see what they could. Moose walked near Jake. He's using his leg as a counterbalance. We all swim over to see what's up. Now there's a massive hole in the lake bed. It was so dark that it was visible as a black splotch under the surface. Visibility in the lake wasn't great, but it's clear enough to make out the beginning of a circle extending away in our direction. "Wow, that's some hole," Parker whistled, leaning forward as if it would give him a better view. Not one of us dared go over the edge. Moose put his feet on the edge though. "God, that's freezing," he said, toes wrapped around the circle. Jacob watched us get close but stayed back. I saw his expression change as he stared at the dark water. He was clearing water out of his ear while staring. "Did you trip into this?" I said. Jake nodded. I think something's in there." Instinctively, we all turned back to the hole and back up, despite his claim being ridiculous. The water was up to my neck. I got a sudden flash of fear that I'd be stuck. "Look, let's go back to the beach." Moose said, probably relying on some lifeguard instincts, and we all wander through the water, using our arms to bounce along the sand until we hit the shadows. Parker's dad was chilling on the dock, feet in the water with a book in his hand. "You guys ready?" he said, slipping the bookmark back into place. We got bored," Parker said, before anyone else could. So we load everything back into the car, going back to the campus uphill from the lake. Parker and his dad started the fire while the rest of us peeled potatoes, cutting meat into chunks. We had recovered from the lake incident and were having a good time and laughing. Jake was trying to laugh but had a hard time keeping his morale. Moose was testing the tenderness of his face every so often, and Jake kept on sticking his finger in each ear while twisting aggressively to get water out. After a while, as we wait for the fire to heat up, he stood up, turning his head to the side, shaking it. "You alright?" McKay said. We all turned to watch. He gets embarrassed. "Yeah, I've got to go to the bathroom." "Is he okay?" Parker's dad said. "Yeah, he tripped in the water and had a scare." Moose said Parker shot him a look and his dad looks worried. Luckily, a log collapsed into coals, distracting him. With our help, he scooped our tinfoil wrapped meals under his coat, building a bed around them. We sat around, kept talking for a while. Every so often we glanced off towards where the bathrooms were, but Jake didn't reappear until the food was ready. Parker offered to go look for him, but Moose said that he should just let him breathe for a while. He finally did come back though. Set the toilet paper on the table, eating the rest of the meal. By the time he's finished, it's dark. Parker's dad brought out the gas lamp to keep away the mosquitoes. No one dares ask Jake if he was alright in front of everyone. We all knew he hated attention. I hated to see him sit there and brood, and the mood of everyone stayed low too. We didn't want to get too cheerful and make him feel left out. It was a weird mood to balance. Finally, Parker's dad announces he's going to bed. That triggered the rest of us to get up as well. We were bored of catering the mood. I saw Moose pull Jake aside, but I went to my little one-man bed and climbed in. I was then woken up by a loud sobbing in the distance. The sound made me jolt out of my sleep. I was wide awake by the time I recognized the sounds. Pulling on my clothes, I unzip my tent and listen. The crying stops, probably reacting to my zipper. Whoever it was couldn't stop themselves. The source of the sound became apparent when I see someone standing in the trees near the table. Hands cupped over their ears, bending over as though they're hurt. I crawled out of my tent, stood up and walked over. Is it Moose? Was his head worse than he'd said? Of course it is Jake. He took one look at me, turning away embarrassed. Your head hurting? The water in my ears. He broke down in sobs. Do you need to go to hospital? He shook his head viciously. His expression happened when I mentioned it. I don't need hospital. Why, do you think I'm crazy? No, Jake, of course not. We're just worried. He muttered something and turned away, holding his head. I stood by awkwardly for a minute, not sure what to do. Should I wake up Parker's dad? get him to lay down. Suddenly Jake yelled and took off into the trees. "Jake, no!" I yelled and ran after him. I was really hoping that yelling would wake up the rest of the camp. I didn't want to leave him alone in the woods in the middle of the night just to wake up Parker's dad for help. He kept yelling as he ran, and it took all my focus to keep his. It was all downhill, bushes, and we'd come out of nowhere from darkness. I did a lot of last minute jumping and dodging. It was a miracle Jake wasn't hitting trees with how quick he was. We crossed a road that wound up the hill several times before I realised what he's doing. He's going back to the lake. I could see its calm surface reflecting starlight. The moon was behind the mountain we're on. "Jake, go away," he said. He emerged from the trees into the parking lot near the lake, ran across the pavement. I tripped over something slamming hard to concrete. By the time I'd stood up, he was already wandering to water, disturbing the reflected stars. I got up, pursued him. I'm now seeing the dock extending over the water. I ran to it, and he used that to get me further out towards the water. He's beyond the pier by this time. I used my momentum and turned it into a flying leap, landing only feet behind him. I surfaced and he's next to me. His eyes were red, with the most hateful expression I've ever seen on his face. He grabs me by the shirt, then shoving me into the water. I tried yelling but ended up swallowing water. I tried to get my feet under me, but he was constantly shaking me. The sand wouldn't let me dig my feet in. My lungs are burning. I flailed around for air. I managed to claw one of his arms off of me, enough to get my feet down, head above the water. I get a half breath in before he shoves me down. I felt his legs moving along the lake bed and realised in a flash of terror that he's dragging me further. I kick and struggle, occasionally going up for air, but he kept pulling me. I lose track of time when I struggle, but eventually I felt ground give out under my feet. The water turns cold as I struggle for breath. I could taste the water turning sour. I threw up. There was nothing for me to kick off down here. I felt Jake pushing me further down. The burning in my lungs turns to aches as my limbs go lethargic. I heard my name underwater. I couldn't tell why. It sounded as though it's coming from down rather than up. It was soft at first. Then, the volume increased. The voice is muffled. The sound of bubbles accompanying it. I felt the bubbles brush my arms and legs. The underwater voice grows louder by proximity. Right in my ear, still muffled, and I'm struggling to understand it. "Please come here. Get back here, please, come on. Come back, please." The tone turned from polite to intensive. I started to yell, hurting my ears. I had to cover my ears to keep them from hurting. As I closed my hands over my head, I felt my eardrum pop. Water now fills my eyes. "Come back, get back here." It was as though they're the only words I can hear. It just kept going, and I couldn't ignore it. I tried to swim to the surface, but felt like it became more difficult to continue with every stroke. I couldn't get up for air. Then something grabs me. I tensed in my response, losing control of limbs. They're very weak now. I felt the grip harden as I'm yanked down at intense speed. That's when I broke into fresh air, rasping and coughing on instinct. Parker's dad held me away out of the water, standing on the lake bed, keeping me above the surface. Moose pulling an unconscious Jake towards the shore. I only catch a glimpse of him. Parker's dad took me to the shore. Moose performs CPR on Jake when we go to the beach. McKay's holding a cell phone dialing 911. It took a couple of minutes, but Jake does come around thankfully. He coughs up water and still held his head. An ambulance arrives and took Jake away. Moose came with us to contact our parents. Parker's dad stays behind so he can pack up the campsite and drive McKay and Parker home. Now I really don't remember much of the ambulance ride. My ears were ringing. I had a hard time getting the water out of my ears though. Every few minutes, my ear pops and develops into a liquid atmosphere. Everything around is muffled, like I'm listening underwater. It comes and goes as it pleases. The muffling sensation is so oppressive that I can't pay attention to the doctors or my parents. Now Moose and McKay have come to see me. It took so much energy and focus to pay attention to them through the liquid haze. Apparently, Jake's been attacking the nurse. No one knows what's wrong with him. But I do. I know what's wrong. When the liquid gets really oppressive and drowns out all the other sounds, I can hear them. The voices telling me to come back.
People like to warn you about the dangers of nature when you go camping, but that's not what you should be afraid of. No, not exactly. I went camping with my girlfriend in a place called Nightfall Forest. As you might expect from the name, it was dark and a foreboding place, with areas where the trees grew so thick that very little sunlight could get through their overgrown branches. Lacey, my girlfriend, and a biologist in training, went to study the ecosystem of a particular area of the forest, known for its unique fungi and bacteria. It was a lot of science worse than me, but a break from work sounded great, so I decided to tag along. She moved out, set up her instruments, as I set up camp not too far from the river. It was cool, a gentle breeze blowing over the camp as I hammered the last nails into the soil below. I had to admit it was nice. Nobody screaming at me about deadlines, no phones ringing every few minutes to complain about a product that I had no part in making, no cars honking at traffic or neighbours yelling loudly over the noise of their TVs. Nothing but the sound of the wind breaking through the trees, the trickle of water over rocks, and a few birds that I couldn't quite pinpoint in the dense foliage above. "What are you smiling at?" Lacey walked over and sat down beside me on a half-rotten log. It creaked under our combined weight. I was smiling. You were? Just enjoy the quietness and solitude, I guess. It's really nice out here, isn't it? She grabbed my hand and kissed the knuckles. Don't worry, you can get back to your keyboard tapping and smog-infested city in just a few short days. That night, we cooked a fish Lacey caught over the fire she built, and it struck me how little I knew of surviving in the wilderness. I was a city boy, born and bred. This was foreign land to me. We made love for the first time under the stars, what little of them shone through the trees above us, and then retired to the tent. I was beat. It was around 2 AM when a sound outside woke me. Dry leaves crackled and branches snapped. I looked over and Lacey was gone, and a brief moment I panicked. Something took her. A wild animal came in and was dragging her away right this second. A crazy old hermit was living in the woods, and he abducted her as penance for trespassing on his land. Endless scenarios ran through my head as a shadow appeared in front of the tent. This is it, I thought. This is where the old crazy hermit comes and murders me and rips out my liver for tomorrow's breakfast. The zipper began to rise slowly. Each metal tooth it ran over echoed through the tent, through my soul. Inch by inch it rose, getting stuck on something halfway. It was too dark to see, I thumbed around for something, anything I could to defend myself. All I could find was my pillow. All the tools were outside. God, I was an idiot. The zipper broke free of its snag, and I rose again, edging closer and closer to my impending doom. I grabbed my pillow and swallowed. At the very least, I could confuse the intruder and escape into the forest. If it was too dark for me to see, that meant it was too dark for them as well. I braced myself. 3, 2, 1. Jesus, you scare me. It was just Lacey. That's my line. What the hell are you doing? I had to pee. Did you have to pull the zip of the tent like a serial killer? I didn't want to wake you. Too late. I'm awake. Fuck me. I thought I was about to lose my liver. Your liver, what? Lacey got into her sleeping bag and fluffed up her pillow. Never mind. Well, now that I'm awake, I'm gonna go pee too. Have fun, she said. I made my way out into the darkness. Crickets' chirps and the trickle of water over rocks continued, unabated. It was both unnerving and soothing at the same time. I finished my business, and as I turned to return to the tent, I froze. I wasn't alone. This wasn't Lacey trying to sneak her way back into the tent without waking me. There was someone standing in the trees, just a few meters away. It was too dark to see anything but a vague outline, but there was no mistaking it. There was a person right there. I could pick up a rock and hit them with it. Did they see me? I couldn't tell which direction the person was facing. They were just standing there, like a statue. I stood still, waiting to see if the figure could make a move. I was sure I could hear the beating of my heart in my chest. Why wasn't it moving? There was a cry in the distance. We both turned towards the sound, and then the figure turned to look at me, his eyes glinting in the darkness before it took off running. I scrambled for the tent and yanked the zipper down as hard as I could, forcing it to get stuck several times. "What are you doing?" Lacey asked, rubbing her eyes. I put a shaky finger to my lips and crawled into my sleeping bag. We waited, listening. There was another cry, fainter this time, and then silence. The thing was gone. "There was something out there," I whispered, unable to hide the fear in my voice. Lacey sat up. "What do you mean? Someone's out there? Who?" I shook my head. There was a cry, a scream, something. And they took off. I left out the part about the eyes. No need to worry her or make her think I was insane. I was a city boy. She would put it down to the unfamiliarity of the woods and not take me seriously. Camping virgin or not, the thing I saw, it wasn't human. The morning came without a wink of sleep, and Lacey went off to check her instruments. "Do you want some breakfast?" I called out. "I'll eat later," she said. The forest felt cold, unwelcoming almost, like the eyes were watching me from every corner. I stood up, thinking to join Lacey as she did her rounds, but then it dawned on me that I had no idea where she was. I was setting up camp when she put her stuff out. I was alone. I made my way over to the trees where I saw the figure the night before. There were footprints in the mud, leading in the same direction where the figure ran off. I didn't imagine it. I followed them for a few meters before they disappeared. It wasn't that the mud ended, the footprints just stopped. I needed to think of an excuse before Lacey got back, so we could get the hell out of here. She could call me a chicken all she wanted, but at least I'd been a live chicken. But as the morning went on, there was no sign of her. I tried my hand at fishing, but all it brought was frustration and even more time to think. I tried to set up booby traps around the camp, but I was no Boy Scout. I didn't know the first thing about setting up a snare. Mud squelched under my feet and twigs snapped. How on earth did someone get so close to our camp without us hearing them? I couldn't make 2 steps without alerting half the forest. Several hours passed and no sign of Lacey. I bit my nails and wore a path in the grass beside our tent. Our phones were off and unable to receive reception out here, regardless. I knew my way back to the car, but that was it. If I went looking for Lacey, chances are I'd get myself lost and I'd be in even more trouble. But then a scream drew me from my thoughts. "Lacey!" I took off running. Getting lost didn't matter if Lacey ended up dead or injured instead. I pushed my way through the trees and branches, scraping my arms and face. There was another scream to my left. I turned, sliding in the mud before picking up speed again. The thing I saw outside the tent, it had her. It was all I could think. I slipped and fell several times, covering myself in mud, and then I heard a third scream, this time to my right. It was playing with me. I fell to my knees exhausted. I had no idea where I was. No idea how to get back. No idea where Lacey was, or even if she was okay. It lured me out here, away from the camp, and now I could do as it pleased with Lacey. It was all I could think of, rational or otherwise. Lacey. I had to save Lacey. I stood up and ran in the direction I came from. At least the direction I thought I came from. Panic was settling in, and the forest looked the same no matter how far I ran. I could have been running in circles for all I knew. Maybe I was. My heart jumped in my throat. Footprints. I found footprints. If I followed them back, I could reach the campsite. I didn't miss a beat as I leapt over rocks and branches. It would have been beautiful if I wasn't scared. Then something moved in front of me, and I was on my back in the mud. Lacey! She looked at me confused. What are you doing? I extracted myself from the muck and grabbed her by the shoulders. That's my line. Are you okay? I heard screams. Her brow furrowed. I didn't hear anything. Are you okay? My head pounded. My chest ached. My brain was clouded with fear and confusion. You didn't hear those screams just before? They were loud enough I could hear them from the camp. I thought it was you. At that she smiled. Oh, you're so sweet. But I was just checking on my instruments. I didn't hear anything at all. Really? She nodded. You're probably just tired. You didn't get much sleep after all. Maybe. A sleepless night wasn't new to me, but it didn't explain why I heard something screaming when she didn't. Come on, let's go back to camp. I whip up a lunch special of canned beans and filtered river water. I attempted a smile that never quite reached my lips and followed her back. The forest was too quiet. My nerves refused to settle down. We ate lunch in silence. My muddy clothes hung by the tent, and all I could think was that I didn't want to be out here any longer. Camping wasn't for me. We were supposed to stay a few more days, but I wasn't sure if I could make it through the next night. Lacey. Yeah, she asked, stuffing her face with beans like she'd never eaten a meal before in her life. I want to get out of here. You want to go for a walk or something? No, out of here entirely. I want to go home. She snickered. Now you're just being silly. We just got here and I haven't finished my recordings. I felt bad, but I couldn't do it. Please. She looked at me. You serious? Yeah, I am. She considered it and then sighed. Is this about the screams? I shook my head. It's not just that. I know you didn't see them, but I saw someone last night. Right here, by the trees. I don't like this place. It's dangerous. Who's to say that tonight they won't return and murder us for real? I know you just wanted to do some research, but that research isn't going to be any good if we're both dead. I don't like this place, and I just don't. I just want to go home, please. She finished her plate of beans and set it down to the log beside her. You owe me big time. I couldn't help hide the smile on my face. Anything at all, you name it. Yeah, well, first I have to go get all my gear, I suppose. One day's worth of results is better than nothing. And you, sir, you get to break down the tent and put everything away. No problem, it'll be done before you know it. My spirits lifted. No doubt she'd give me shit the entire way home, but I could deal with that. Because we'd be alive, and we'd be safe. That was all that mattered. I gathered our gear up in record time, and was waiting when Lacey returned. We loaded up, I said an internal F you, and hope I never see you again, to the forest, and we went on our way. Did you manage to get anything from your tests? I tried to make conversations we walked so I wouldn't have to think about how creepy the forest was. The sun was setting and it would be dark soon. I hated winter. Early nights suck. No, not very much, nah. But it's fine, I can come out here and get some by myself. I scratched my nose and avoided looking at her. This was the right thing to do. I wasn't imagining things, I just wasn't. I'm sorry, I know you're looking forward to this trip. Look, if you're gonna mope the whole way home, just stop right now. I agreed to go back with you, didn't I? She did, yeah. Now stop fussing over it. Sorry. We walked in silence. The closer we got to the car, the more forest sprang to life. Birds sang, insects chirped, and the various creatures scuttled around the forest floor. The sound of several large animals stomping through the brush caught my attention. But I couldn't find them. As long as we didn't get in their way, we'd be fine. The sun disappeared behind the horizon, but the car was in sight. Just a few more meters, and we'd— Josh! Lacey, a few steps ahead of me, stopped dead in her tracks. She turned to look at me in the gloom of dusk, her expression unreadable. Lacey's voice called out my name. Only Lacey, standing in front of me, wasn't the name who called it. It came from the trees to our right. "What the hell?" "We need to go now," Lacey said. She didn't wait for an answer and picked up the pace towards the car. "Josh, wait!" Something came running out of the trees. It was Lacey. What the hell? Lacey, the original Lacey, turned around. There were two of them looking right at me. What the hell is going on? Lacey, the other Lacey, was covered in mud. I took a step back as she ran towards me. "Josh, it's me!" My eyes flickered back and forth between the two of them, and my back pressed into a tree. "I went out to pee last night and something odd grabbed me. This thing isn't me." I didn't know what to believe. They were a mirror image of each other. I don't know what that thing is, but I can tell you that when I went out to pee last night, I most certainly wasn't grabbed. The non-messy Lacey looked at me, her eyes wide. And yeah, I agree, we really should get out of here now. The messy Lacey turned and jumped before I could say a word. The two Laceys fell in the mud, scratching and punching and kicking. I ran over, grabbed the nearest one and pulled her off. There was a growl deep in the forest. I swallowed. That wasn't a deer. There was no time for this. It was getting darker and colder by the second. I turned to Lacey on my right. "What did you get me for my 5th birthday?" "A red Matchbox car," she said without hesitation. I turned to Lacey on my left, pushing herself up out of the mud. "What did I want but not get for my birthday last year?" "A rainbow cake with buttercream frosting," she said, flicking the mud off the front of her pants. Both were correct. The red Matchbox car was a pride of my childhood, and it sat on my dresser at home. Only Lacey knew about the cake I wanted last year, but due to a mistake at the bakery, never got it. This was insane. I don't know what the fuck's going on here, but I can't be the only one who heard that growl just now. Lacey, both Laceys look at me. A second later it was on us. A featureless man, like something moulded out of clay, ran for Lacey. Its eye glinted in the darkness, and it barreled into her full speed, sending them both tumbling to the ground. A scream barely had time to escape my lips before it was all over. The clay man ripped out her throat. Lacey, the other one beside me, screamed. The yellow eyes turned towards her and then looked at me. A mistake was made. There weren't supposed to be two Laceys. Something fucked up the process. The clay man grabbed my wrist and began to charge before me. It grew taller, matching my height. The watch on my arm began to form on his. The bare chest morphed into my shirt and jacket. Its blank face became mine. Lacey screamed again. I pulled the creature away from her and we fell, hitting the ground hard. Mud clouded my vision. Mud, so much mud. It was on everything, working its way into every crevice in my body. I extracted my limbs and swung for the thing with my face. It grunted and grabbed my hair, pulling me back down. It pinned me to the ground, and as it adjusted to bear its full weight down on me, I lifted my knee. I kicked with all my might, sending the other me tumbling to the ground. I grabbed Lacey's hand and ran blindly for the car. "Get back here," the man yelled in my voice. I ran as fast as I could, not turning back. "Hey, don't leave me here!" I fumbled for the keys in my pocket. The car was just ahead. Lacey was dead. Was this my Lacey? There was no time to think about it. I pressed a button on my keys, relief flooding through me as I heard the familiar beep signifying the car was unlocked. I ran for the driver's side, while Lacey ran for the other. Our things could be replaced, but not our lives. I saw myself running for the car as I put the key in the ignition. Even more frightening than seeing the other Lacey in front of me was seeing myself. It was a perfect copy. It even ran with heavy feet like I did. The engine roared to life as the no longer clay version of myself jumped up onto the car. Lacey had her head in her hands, crying. I threw the car into reverse and watched as it went flying into the parking lot. I sped off, visions of myself running like a crazed Terminator with a limp in the rear-view mirror burning into my mind. Lacey said nothing as we drove the empty roads home. We both watched her, or at least the other version of her, die before our very eyes. But which Lacey was it? Did she even know herself? And now there was another version of me running around somewhere out there too. Both Laceys truly believe they were the original. It keeps me up at night sometimes wondering. I've never seen anything to doubt that the Lacey sleeping beside me isn't the one that I met when we were 17-year-olds and stupid kids with too much time on our hands. But I could see it in her eyes when they argued. They both believe they were the one and only true Lacey. They both have the same memories, the same features, the same scars, the same feelings and emotions. Somewhere out there is another version of me, Did he return to the woods, lost and confused, or is he figuring out his next move, waiting for the right moment to get rid of the imposter inhabiting his house, sleeping in his bed and making love to his girlfriend? Sometimes I wonder though, in the quiet of the night when the world is asleep, am I really me? If we have the same memories and we both believe ourselves to be the one and only true version, how do I know that I'm the original? Even if he does come and kill me and take my place, how will I ever know? I won't, and that's the thing that worries me the most.
When I was 19, my friend Jackson and I had decided that we'd go camping on our own for the first time in the woods. He had just turned 21 that summer. We're young and was killing for a good camping trip. Jackson was a bit of a privacy crazed individual, so he insisted on us sleeping in different tents. Despite my protests, he never changes his mind. The drive out to the camping spot was about a 3 hours drive away, but with Jackson's constant stops to restrooms, drive-thrus, petrol stations, and eventually attempting to force me to drive, which was unsuccessful in the end, added another 2.5 hours to our estimated time arrival. Now when we eventually arrive there, we get to a heavily wooded area, beginning the hour drive down the vacant dirt road. It only took half an hour to notice the strange things in the road. We had to swerve to avoid a deer carcass, stop and move a fallen tree, which didn't seem the slightest dead, and had weird arrows caved into it. Perhaps the strangest of all, however, was a large amount of barbed wire and nails spread across a short stretch of road. Now we actually get out, removing some of the objects, when Jason jokes, "Looks as though someone don't want us here." I laugh under my breath, but I start to think there may have been more to this. We arrive at the camp around dusk, begin to set up our tents. It took about 10 minutes to get mine up, and I decide to wander the ground a bit. I don't feel safe. But I've been here multiple times before with my parents, and never had anything strange or frightening happen here. I told Jackson I was going to wander a bit and that I'd be back soon. I walk the grounds when I hear a stick break behind a tree. My first thought was that, oh great, a bear. I stood still, almost certain that the furry beast would break into my line of sight and murder me, but nothing came. As much as I'd like to say I courageously investigated, I ran like hell. I got back and saw Jackson had his tent up and was starting a fire. I choked out on exhausted breath. "Jackson, there's a bear." "Of course there is. It's a hot spot for them," he replies. Now this comforts me, but then chills me to the bone. Had I survived a close encounter with a bear? Or was something more sinister out there? We began drinking. We're really messed up, we could hardly walk, but I hear the crackling of sticks again from right behind my tent, snapping me sober. I stand up shakily and begin walking the short walk to my tent with Jackson a couple of steps behind me. Now we must have looked ridiculous, but in that moment we were confident in numbers. Again, nothing was there. I circled the tree multiple times, but there was absolutely no one. Jackson clicked on the flashlight he kept on his belt and shone it everywhere. There was no one in our surroundings, as far as we can see. We don't hear anyone, so where are they? I stepped on something metallic and saw it was a freshly opened can of cream soup, 2 Diet Coke cans, and another tree about 3 feet away. The tree has fallen, but the rest aren't. Reasonably afraid, we decide it's best to sleep in the truck again. We fall asleep to the radio at 12:14 AM, and I slept pretty well until 3:47, when I hear a slight tapping on my window. Reluctantly, I open my eyes and slowly turn my head. It was the sort of feeling you get when you know whatever is there will inevitably scare you till the last moment of your life. You know, where all the hairs on the back of your neck are standing up. Now outside my window was a pale-faced person, tapping on my window ever so slightly with a long fingernail that looked as though it had been growing for 13 years. I screamed, but nothing came out. I tried to turn, but couldn't. Locked into a never-ending gaze with this thing. I shook Jackson awake, telling him just to drive. I think he saw the person outside my window because he kicked into gear really quick. He turns the keys and thank God the engine roars to life. He barreled down the empty dirt road at insane speeds until we met with yet another fallen tree. Jason slams the brakes and we look at each other contemplating. We both know what we have to do. We kicked our doors open, hightailed it to the tree, using every muscle in our adrenaline-filled bodies, moving it with ease, before turning back to the truck. I reach my door. I see Jackson isn't on the other side. In the dim glow of the headlights, I saw Jackson lying in the road with a large arrow in his calf, preventing his escape. I then turned to run back to him, but it's too late. These people drop from the trees like monkeys, suddenly surrounding him, continuously smashing him with makeshift weaponry. I have to go. Before getting out of there though, I threw the biggest rock I could find and hit one of them. As I sped off, I see it dying in the ditch off the side of the road. I drove all morning into early daylight hours, not stopping until I reached the police station. I told them the whole story, and they seemed reasonably sincere, and assured me they'd checked the area. Jackson was never found though, making the only thing that proved we were there was our tents, which are strangely unzipped, but nothing is taken. I'm not sure what happened that night in the forest. I really have no idea. The sound of crackling sticks was someone dropping that broccoli can from the tree. And while we were investigating, 2 people climbed into the tents waiting. When we decided to sleep in the truck, they took a few hours to block off the road, or it may have already been so, and scared us to their trap. I think the only reason I'm alive is because I was on the other side of the truck where the archer couldn't hit me. I will never go camping again.
About 3 weeks ago, I drove my son out to a national park for a weekend camping trip. We took the 410 out from Tacoma into Mount Rainier, a place my dad used to take me when I was a kid. I wanted my son David, who's 2.5, to find the same joy of the wilderness as I had, but I'm quite convinced that he'll be terrified of forests for the rest of his life. When we arrived that Friday, the weather was crisp, and the first signs of spring had finally made themselves known. We walked, or rather I walked with David on my shoulders, for about 2, maybe 3 hours from the parking lot into a small, desolate camping ground with a pre-made fire pit. I'm not a very overproductive parent, so I let David wobble around for a bit, and I pitched the tent. Just as I was about done, and was getting ready to unload the 3-day supply into our tent, I heard David make some sounds from behind me. Now, I recognise these sounds immediately, as they're sounds he usually makes when he's excited about something. I turned around and saw him hit the grass, about 20 feet away, staring into the woods. More strangely, he was doing this thing he does when he's particularly excited about something, in which he's slapping both of his thighs repeatedly. I slowly walk over, trying to keep an eye on both him and the woods at the same time, but there was nothing in the tree line that I could make out. When I was finally by his side, I asked him what he'd seen, and to that his response was, Monkey man, Dad." He was smiling, still slapping his thighs, and as much as I tried to match his excitement like a good parent should do, suddenly the serenity of the woods was replaced by a sense of unease. I fixed my eyes on the tree line and peered in very, very carefully. It was such an incredibly strange thing for him to say. I picked David up, not wanting to leave him alone anymore, at least until I could regain some clarity, and walked into the tree line. I don't know how many of you are parents, but the last thing you want to do when you're taking a kid out for a fun weekend is frighten him. I mention this because the sensible thing may have been to hush him, to tell him to keep quiet for a while, but then I also knew that, realistically, this was just an imaginative manifestation. After a few minutes of scouting around with David on my shoulders, I returned to the camp. It was about 3:30, I believe, and so I made us some lunch, still keeping an occasional eye on that space which David had been clapping and yapping about a few minutes before. As much as I tried to forget it, I just couldn't. I'm not superstitious, I don't believe in aliens, ghosts or Bigfoot, but I suppose my parental instinct was simply in too much of a high gear for me to let it go. So as the cold sun was setting, I decided to ask David about what he'd seen. To understand my story a little better, it might be relevant to mention here that David had a mild learning disability, which has particularly impaired his speech. He can understand fine, but his ability to communicate has lagged behind somewhat. As I was getting to the fire, I asked him about the monkey man. I asked if it was a big monkey man. David thought about it for a second. He then laughed and nodded. I then asked if it seemed like a nice monkey man, and David once again giggled in approval. I wasn't really sure what else to ask. Nightfall struck, and on full bellies, I read a chapter from a book to him as he fell asleep in the sleeping bag. When I fell asleep myself, I had almost forgotten about the monkey man. I awoke in pitch darkness, but the fire pit was out. I reached out to feel for David, and panic struck me hard. He wasn't in the tent anymore. With only my underwear on, I stormed out, but realised it was too dark to see anything, so I dropped back into the tent and tore my flashlight out of my bag. I was screaming his name and all at the same time. With only the weak beam of a flashlight I didn't think I'd ever actually have to rely on, I shone it around in circles, still calling for David. For some reason, I ran towards the spot at which David had been so transfixed on in the daytime. I shouted names to the trees. As I trotted inwards into the pitch-black forest, I was too frantic to notice how badly my feet were getting scraped up by the bark and stone. After only about a minute of walking, I saw something that made me drop my flashlight and bolt forward. David was standing there, peering into the darkness, utterly still. I grabbed onto him hard and began to sob. Still clutching him tightly, I picked up the flashlight again, which had been idly beaming around, and scouted around, fending off the darkness. I couldn't see anything. As I carried him back, looking over my shoulder, I asked him what had happened. He implied that he didn't know, and that he was too tired. David had a long history of sleepwalking. Last night, I locked up the tent from the inside with a padlock. I only got about 3 hours of good rest. David slept like a rock, despite my trembling embrace. The following morning, I cooked some eggs and bacon on the camping stove. David had no recollection of what had happened, and seemed content to continue the trip. I thought it would be incautious to shrug off last night's events as mere sleepwalking, especially considering the monkey man business, but also it would be a bit too silly to cancel the entire trip over it. Thus, I made a promise to myself that if anything else were to happen, I would drive us back to Tacoma at a moment's notice. The rest of the day was actually quite nice, and helped me take my mind off things. David was at first a little upset at not having the iPad, but eventually discovered that nature can be just as cool as pixels. We made some bark boats with faces on them and set them downstream, watched squirrels and listened to the birds. It was everything that I'd hoped the trip would be. At dusk, when the trees stretched long shadows across the grass, David was getting too cold and too tired to play anymore, so I decided we would spend the rest of the day in the tent. I had brought along this game where you have to trace the outline of a person with the electrode, and if your aim is off, it makes a funny sound. I don't remember what it's called, but David found it hilarious. It's dumb, but supposedly helps with motor development. At one of David's turns, he made an error and the little speaker made the sound again. David bellowed into laughter. What happened next filled me with a sense of fear that I doubt anything will ever match. From about 150 feet away, I heard the exact same laugh that David had made, only that it was much deeper. It was almost like when you record yourself speaking, then digitally you pitch it down. I froze, and this time, I couldn't hide my reaction from David. I could tell by his face that he heard it too. I lifted my finger up to my lips to communicate to him that we needed to be quiet. It was at this moment that I also noticed that the sun had completely set. I also noticed just how dead quiet the woods were. Every second felt like an eternal minute as we sat there in the tent, absolutely still, enveloped in the silence. When the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears finally ceased a little, I slowly leaned over towards my backpack to get my handgun out. When I turned around to face David again, I saw that he had picked up the electrode again. I sternly removed it from his hand and whispered with equal sternness, "Not now, David." Then, just as I'd said it, a low, broken voice whispered from literally inches from the tent,
"Not now, David."
The next thing I'm aware of is that I'm shooting wildly through the fabric of the tent in the direction of the sound. David is screaming, and as the gunshots ring throughout the woods, I hear the last remnants of something sprinting away. With my hand violently trembling, I opened the padlock and jumped out with a flashlight in my left hand, aiming the faint beam into the black nothingness. I grabbed David and stuffed everything within arm's reach into the backpack and ran. The way back was pure terror. There was not a second in which I didn't feel as if something was right behind us, ready to leap out from behind us, or the side of the trail, out from the darkness. The only thing I could say to David was, "It's okay, you'll get the iPad soon. Do you want the iPad?" Nothing ever leaped out at us, nor did I hear anything except for the rushing of wind and the occasional running of stream from the trail side. I was so out of it that even in the car, I kept checking the back seat just to see there was nothing sitting in it, ready to destroy us. I don't know how to explain to David's paediatrician what happened in Mount Rainier. I haven't even told his mother the full story, only that I thought someone came up to our tent and I fired a warning shot. Needless to say, David hasn't been the same since. He has been getting constant headaches, which might be from damage to his ears by the gunshot. I don't really know how to end the story, but one thing's for certain. Never ever take your kids out to Mount Rainier National Park. I am a 20-year-old man from Mexico. For some background, my family and I live in a certain state in Mexico. It's been known for drug violence, but my family never was really affected by it. So I unwisely thought that my family was immune to all that stuff. This incident that I'm sharing in this story totally awoke me from that fantasy. For some more information for the readers, I live in a multi-generation household with 3 parents, 3 siblings, my paternal grandfather, 2 paternal aunts, along with both of their husbands, 1 paternal uncle and his wife, 1 maternal aunt, she has a boyfriend that doesn't live with us, 1 maternal uncle, he's single, and 5 cousins. It's a pretty crowded house, but I manage, barely at times. Around 9 years ago, during spring break, some American friends that were also business partners came to visit my family. The American family composed of a father and his girlfriend, along with their 2 children. The kids' names were Mary, age 19, and Jerifo, who was my age at the time. I was fairly good friends with Jerifo, while Mary usually hung out with my older cousins. Our families decided to go on a camping trip out in the desert, but both our families were quite fond of extreme adventuring, so we wanted to find some remote location in the desert. The less people in the location, the more thrilling our camping would be in our minds. So me, my dad, my older brother, 2 cousins, Jericho's father, Mary, and a few of my aunts and uncles set off camping. Once we found a wonderful camping spot, we set up our stuff. Me and Jericho started getting bored sitting around the campfire, so without telling the adults, we decided to go on a little hike. A very stupid mistake, but we were nothing more than young 11-year-old kids. We just wanted to have an adventure on our own, and we thought we were invincible. Man, that didn't end well at all. While me and Jericho were hiking out, we managed to get lost, not a surprise to anyone at all. As we were walking, we had totally lost track of where we were. We wandered helplessly around the desert, screaming as loud as we could, hoping that our families or some other campers would hear us. This kept us for around 3 hours, before we almost lost all hope of rescue. It was starting to get extremely dark and very cold. We suddenly came across some sort of human activity several yards away. Jericho and I managed to pick out around 6 or 7 trucks. When we got closer, we could easily see around 24 men hanging around. From what we could tell, they were composed of a bunch of Latino and white guys. All the white guys had racist tattoos all over their bodies. One especially creepy dude had a skull tattoo on his face, while obviously other stuff was tattooed on the head of the other guy. The Latino men were similarly heavily tattooed, but I can't remember what they looked like now. The men were all armed with assault rifles. Me and Jericho exchanged confused glances. The lighting was quite dark, but I could easily see that the Hispanic guys were handing over white bags to the white men. Obviously this was some sort of drug deal between the Mexican cartel and some American gang. I have heard several stories of such things happening, but I never imagined seeing something like that in person. Jericho whispers to me that we need to get out of there before they saw us. We tried to scurry out as fast as quietly possible. This totally failed, as one of the Mexican gunmen spotted us and pointed us out to his buddies. The American and Mexican drug dealers started to shoot at us. Bullets were flying and crashing all around us. Our adrenaline kicked in and then we ran out the wind. I felt one bullet graze my side, but I kept running. Jericho was shot in the stomach and he fell to the ground clutching his wound. He let out the most blood-curdling scream imaginable, the scream that still haunts me to this day. I knew that if I went to his aid, I would have been killed too, so I was forced to leave him behind. When I glanced back, a Mexican drug dealer dressed up as a trashy cowboy walked up to Jericho. He then finished him off. No time for tears, I kept running. I prayed to every god that I could think of to save me. I was totally convinced that I was going to die that night, and my family would never find me. Slowly scumbling to fatigue, I glanced towards my right, and I spot a river 10 feet away. Knowing that this was my best chance of escaping my pursuers, despite the risk of drowning, I jumped into the river. I was never a stellar swimmer, but with the danger I was in, I suddenly became an Olympic swimmer that would have made Michael Phelps proud. The drug dealers continued to fire at me, but I eventually swam far enough away they gave up. I swam for another hour before I went back into dry land. Afterwards, I found a cave to settle into for the rest of the night. 3 hours later, I woke up to a flashlight in my face. For a second, I thought the drug dealers had found me again, but I was relieved to find out that it was simply just a rescue party sent to me by Jericho's family. I was airlifted to hospital and treated for my wounds. After my recovery, I explained what happened to my and Jericho's families. A sympathetic police officer explained to us that we probably witnessed a drug deal between the Juarez cartel and the Eerie Brotherhood. He then advised us to leave before the cartel tried any further attacks on us. Jericho's family called off the vacation and went home the next day. Not wanting further retaliation from the cartels, my own family moved to the Osakata state. So far so good, we've never had any trouble from the cartels again. Jericho's body was never found. I have no idea what happened to the dealers that attacked us that night, but I wish them the worst. I still have no contact with Jericho's family. To this day, I still get nightmares about the whole incident. It seems like this will be a chip on my shoulder for a long time.